Next guest is Kate Sweeney. And that name may sound familiar to you because you may have heard her reporting on NPR, story here and there. Kate is a regular contributor, but she's also the author of American Afterlife, which explores the death and memorialization experiences of Americans past and present. And that goes right with ragtime jazz, I think. You think there's a lot of killing. So she's going to share what she's learned. There's really some pretty fascinating stuff about things that we may have done before and we've totally gotten away from. But anyway, Kate, yeah. They're all yours, Kate.
It is fabulous to be here. How are you guys tonight? Good, good. Good-looking crowd. Nothing like, I don't know if he made this joke, but we were backstage and we're like, oh, a little death, a little ragtime. It goes together really, really well. So that's how we're going to do. So I have a question for y'all. Let's see. Maybe you've seen an image like this before, and maybe this is who you think of when you think of our Victorian ancestors. Yes, that is a mother shrouded behind that small girl. These hidden mother images are often the kinds that we think of when we think of our forebears in the 1800s, as well as other images that strike us as strange and morbid. This is no accident. The Victorians invented pretty much everything we think of when it comes to the worlds of funerals and death, from the funeral procession to the deathbed scene to the cemetery. No wonder so many of us conjure up a morbid people. I'm going to examine a few of these phenomena and ask you this question at the end of this very short presentation. Remember the question, our Victorian forebears, were they weird? Some people already have an opinion on this. So, weird item one, the Victorians invented the cemetery as we know it, right? Prior to the 1800s, before the Victorians, there were graveyards in the United States, but they were not pleasant places, nor were they meant to be visited. Then, one night in Paris, at a particularly overcrowded city graveyard, came the nasty cave-in, smelled round the world. Hundreds of, this is gross, y'all, decomposing corpses went spilling into neighboring cellars. True story. Reports of the stench are legion. By the way, the bodies from this infamous incident were all moved to create what are now known as the Paris catacombs, fun fact. But this is also the event that helped spark the new garden cemetery movement. The building of places like Père Lachaise in Paris, Mount Auburn in Boston, and yes, Oakland Cemetery here in Atlanta. We're all part of this movement. Gentle, garden-like places of eternal rest built on city outskirts, designed to be visited and spent time in. And these cemeteries are the places we most likely imagine these days when we think of cemeteries at all. Their winding avenues, green spaces, their cul-de-sacs also influence the great parks, as well as another future design, the suburb. It's true. I'll get back to cemeteries in a moment, but first on to weird item number two. The Victorians wore the hair of dead people. Yes. A popular material for letting folks know that you were in mourning in the 1800s was human hair. This one says, "Our darling mother." I love that. This was the era of the romantic tintype of a husband or a daughter accompanying a lock of his or her hair, which became ready-made mourning jewelry once your loved one had died. The Victorians, who were downright surrounded by death, folks in the 1800s, from farming accidents, diseases, childbirth, not to mention the Civil War, wove the hair of their dead into, da-da-da, bracelets, chains, earrings, watch fobs, brooches, wreaths, doilies, purses, yes, even tiaras. Women's magazines of the mid-1800s contained craft projects to make these items yourself at home. These projects were painstaking. I ran across one that just tells the reader outright that ladies lacking a particular skill might just be better off not attempting it. It was just too darn hard. But the thing is, mourning was designed to be hard. You had buried your brother. You would stay up nights over a candle, sweating over the thinnest pins wrapped in his hair. You would wear scratchy clothes and mourning veils for months. It would not be convenient, it would not be subtle, and you would not be comfortable. Even today, when someone we know dies, we feel this urge to work, to shepherd that spirit to the other side. We want to sprinkle dirt on the casket. We want to scatter those ashes out to sea, to get a painful tattoo even, marking the passing of that life, to translate the emotional pain to physical work, to do something. And this brings us to our final weird item, which is perhaps the granddaddy of all bits of evidence we like to dig up, if you will. When it comes to the question, were the Victorians weird? They took photographs of their dead. It's true. Remember, in the 1800s, people saw a lot more death, so they hoped for an easy death themselves. Death by things like the flu and childbirth were all common. In those days, the Grim Reaper showed up fairly often at home, and this scenario was what people preferred. Think of it this way: you knew you were going to die. You just hoped that when it happened to you, you would be in your own bed. This hope evolved into an ideal, known as the good death, death at home, surrounded by loved ones, and ideally saved. The whole thing stemmed from evangelical Christianity, but really it pervaded American culture. Even people who were not Christian hoped for death at home with family. The good death found its way into books, plays, later even movies. Here's where we get the weepy death scenes from Uncle Tom's Cabin, Camille, Little Women, even Love Story, if you remember that one. In the late 1800s, the new technology of photography made it affordable for the nation's new middle class to have portraits made of their dead. Memorial photography was a sort of proof that a good death had taken place, no matter how awful the actual experience had been. The dead could be posed in positions of long-awaited rest, eyelids shut, hands folded peacefully on chests. These photographs, taken out and looked at again and again, shaped families' final memories of their dead. Often, they were the only visual depictions of them that people owned. Survivors hung these images prominently in their houses. They carried them around in lockets. They were proud that their son or daughter or mother had died well. That death was the capstone of a life well lived. Which brings us back to our central question: were they weird? Well, during the period when a widow covered her face in a veil and wore black for months, she was also exempted from social obligations for up to 2 years. Think of that, 2 years of exemptions from parties you don't want to go to, 2 years in which you could be a little rude, a little crazy, and it's okay. Compare this to today, when there is no one set of rules for what to do when someone dies. Those of us in mourning take a few weeks off work. When we return, our coworkers don't know how to talk to us. Death and mourning still happen to us all, but it's no longer part of the expected narrative of American life. And I think that's why many of us feel sort of a sense of betrayal when death comes into our lives, a sense that, oh, this wasn't supposed to happen. We think of the Victorians as weird, largely because of the large-scale death culture that was there for them, the cemetery plots they tended lovingly, the hair jewelry they made, and the photos they took while in mourning, the black way they wore that announced, "I am feeling grief, death happened to me." Today, we don't have a culture like that. Instead, when someone we love dies, we are often left to feel completely alone. So, back to our question. Were the Victorians weird? Or is it us? Thank you.